always have to be like this. So my first meeting with the university was in 2005 as a bachelor student. Since then, I have been a bit back and forth, also with other jobs in society. Now I'm back. I'm teaching science communication at the faculty while I'm doing a PhD on penguins. And I'm also involved in working for the rights of PhDs. And I think we all either heard of or we experienced ourselves the symptoms of a PhD life. Lacking motivation, deprived of sleep, never feeling good enough, crying in front of professors. Huh? We all done it. But I refuse to accept that this is the PhD life. And this is, luckily, I think, is because that I have experience from outside the university setting, so that every time I feel that something is wrong, but I am expected to go, yes, sir, or yes, ma'am, my head actually goes, what kind of workplace is this? And that's also, I returned to the university because I wanted to challenge myself, I wanted to have fun, and I wanted to also help make the world a slightly better place. And I didn't want to get trapped in this PhD trap. Didn't want to get caught in it. So this talk is not directed to those of you who think that crying in the office and feeling sick to your stomach when you enter campus is something that you should expect as a PhD. Because if that's the case, then you should be a case for the human resources. You should ask for help. The rest of the talk is about how or what the university is meant to be and how we can live our PhD lives to the fullest. Because the university is a unique place. We have entered a world where we can learn from the best. We are standing on the shoulders of giants, as they say. And we have a free voice. And there are, in fact, very few rules on how to do things. The phrase, "this is how we do it here," it doesn't belong at the university. Because the university is one of those places where new thinking and new ideas should always challenge the common practice. And that is our role and also our privilege as PhDs. We are supposed to challenge the known and discover the unknown. And to me, the university, it has to deal with 4 things. And we as PhDs, we have to be aware of those things and also try to change it for the better. UEO, I owe you. So you've seen this on coffee mugs and shopping bags. And this is one of the marketing slogans for the University of Oslo. But it's probably one of the worst slogans I've seen. Because this is not the way to meet any employee. There's no death. There is no, we make the university. And there is no university without us. So in a way, I would like to say, UiO, I owe you nothing. We are in this together. Penguins, huh? Also, I would like to say, stop being so grateful all the time. And this is because when PhDs are asked, when we are asked, why do we not demand more? Why do we not complain about the situation if we are in a bad situation? 2 of the most common answers are, but I didn't know that I had the right. Or, no, but I'm supposed to be grateful for just having the position. But there are many things to be grateful for, but having the position, getting the job, that was all you. And you got the job. Now you have to raise the bar. Because in any interesting job, you are hired for your qualities and your potential. Yes, doing a PhD is a process of learning, but in any interesting job, you learn something new every day. and you find new ways to solve things. Doing a PhD is neither magic nor necessarily harder than any other job. That's not why the PhD is special. But we all know that doing a PhD is not just a job, huh? Doing a PhD is special because it's kind of personal. It's all about you. Because you form the thesis, and the thesis forms you. Right? So, the university has invested in us, in our ideas, and our creativity. And you are the manager of your own thesis, which at the very end is supposed to give a new direction to your field. And the thing that, if you're supposed to fulfill this potential, we have to be open about, we have to reflect on, and also communicate to our supervisors, the research group, and the university what we need in order to do great. And also to use that to make other people do great. So you have to tell people what you need. And only you can know how you work best. And you have to figure this one out and communicate it to your surroundings. The thing that you should be grateful for is that you have rights as a PhD and a coworker. There are so many people today, and also before them, working and fighting for your rights, so please honor them by using them. A very simple thing that you can start with is actually to negotiate your paycheck and demand that your boss implements coworker evaluations. Create your own voice. PhDs are often put into two categories. The ones that figure out things on their own, and the ones that don't. In each case, one of the most important things is that you take ownership of your own work. And science communication is it's a great tool for that. Because science communication triggers motivation. Because all communication starts with reflecting on what you want to achieve and who you want to reach. And this decides how you communicate. If you want to present at a conference, if you do a poster at PhD Day, if you write popular science articles in the media, or if you do video blogs on YouTube. And it also decides how you write and where you publish your scientific work. And you can be motivated at different levels at the same time. For me, it's like this. I am motivated at the scientific level because I want to contribute with new knowledge to my own research field. So that's why I write papers, I go to conferences, try to put up seminars so I can discuss with other researchers. I'm also motivated at a personal level. The joy I feel when I'm watching penguins, when I can when I get a new idea or I can form a new hypothesis. That's why I, for example, write blogs during fieldwork to share those feelings and those thoughts with other people. You can also I am also motivated at an environmental level. I want to help save the penguins. And that's why for example, I do presentations for people in nature management, NGOs, politicians, and school kids. And also why I probably should write more opinion articles. So these goals and motivations, they also shape the questions that I ask in my research. So whether or not you are interested in the big context of your research group's project or not, you have to find your own motivation. And it might change during the process of doing a PhD. Because this will also influence how you contribute. And another thing that is great about science communication is that when you do outreach, you get feedback. And it means that you get to look at your own research from another perspective. And that means that you get to test your argumentation. You get to get critique, to evaluate your thinking and strengthen your ideas. And these are highly valuable skills in a research group, because research is discussion. Just do it. This is very easy to say, but that's very hard to do, huh? But my experience after now almost 12 years at the university is that it is in fact full of possibilities if you just grab them. So if you want to put up a seminar with other research groups, just do it. If no one else has the time, then why not you? If you want to communicate your research, if you want to write a book, just do it. You don't have to wait for your boss to agree with what you're saying because you have a free voice. And there are so many helpers. There's the science library, there are the communication staff, and there are also us working or teaching science communication at the faculty. If you want to be a good writer or a great project leader, which are not necessarily, not given that these are skills that you get from a research education. Most probably you will adopt a poor language and messy project skills. But you are not just part of one research group, at one institute, at one faculty. The university is huge. So if you want to be a good writer or a brilliant rhetoric, there are experts at other faculties that you can learn from. Take courses. There are research schools, organizations, and many people that will give you responsibilities and leadership that will make you grow. So if you want to put up a new project, if you want to put up a new course, if you find something that is wrong and you want to fix it, just do it. Because the university is what we decide that it should be. It's not static. It is forever moving and developing and discovering, and so are we. That's all I had to say.
Thank you so much, Norit, for an inspirational talk to our students. And again, the Hello Kitty spinner.
Oh, thank you.
So I'm just waiting for my slides. Yes. Surviving the stress of a PhD. So as we've heard today, so stress is such a common feeling about PhD students that it often seems inevitable, inescapable, and a necessary part of the process. And this is going to be the topic of the next talk. The next speaker says about himself, I'm not a motivational speaker, productivity guru, or time management expert. My aim is neither to motivate nor inspire, but hopefully to provide some useful insight that can make life a little easier en route to your PhD. We are delighted to have with us today blogger, author, dare I say motivator, but perhaps, and in this context, more importantly, and perhaps not that surprisingly for you too, either, former physicist James Hayton, who of course has a PhD in nanoscience from the University of Nottingham, with Professor Moriarty. I hope that's not a Sherlock Holmes reference. It is, okay. So he claims to have written his thesis in only 3 months, but only after panicking a few years before that. So I'm quite sure that this guy knows what he's talking about. So please, Hayton, let us know how we can deal with the stress during the PhD. Please.
Thank you very much. Is the microphone working? Yeah. So, thank you very much for that introduction, and thanks for inviting me. This is my 3rd time in Norway, but my 1st time in Oslo. It's been a wonderful experience so far. So I'm going to talk about surviving the stress of a PhD. This is basically what I do. I coach PhD students for the last 7 years or so. Before that, I did a couple of postdoc contracts. Before that, I was a PhD student, and before that, I did a master's. So towards the end of my master's degree, I was looking for what to do next. And I had a couple of interviews for PhD positions at various places, but the most important one was at Nottingham, where I had 2 interviews with 2 potential supervisors. So I went into the first one and sat down, and one of the very first questions he asked me was, why do you want to do a PhD? And there were all kinds of reasons why. So one reason was I just wanted to be able to put doctor on my credit card. Also, there's kind of a good sort of feeling of prestige being able to call yourself doctor. Also, part of the motivation was I hadn't done all that well as an undergraduate, partly because I was drinking and partying too much and kind of scraped through. So it was also an opportunity to sort of make up for that and show what I could really do. But of course, I couldn't really say any of those things. So instead, I came up with some sort of mumbling, not very coherent answer about pushing forward the edge of knowledge and all of that kind of thing. And he kind of frowned and said, well, the best reason to do a PhD is because you love doing research. I thought, damn, that's a good answer, but obviously too late. So the rest of the interview went on, and it was okay, but I kind of felt like we weren't really gelling. But fortunately, I had a second opportunity. So shortly after that interview ended, I went into the second one and sat down, and again, within a minute or two, he asked, why do you want to do a PhD? So of course, I said, because I'd love doing research. And he smiled, and a few months later, I started my PhD program, and everything was great. Everything was not great. It's much, much easier to get onto a PhD program than it is to complete one, as I discovered very, very, very quickly. So initially, there was this kind of feeling that, I've succeeded, I've been accepted, I'm good enough to do a PhD. But then I ended up massively stressed and on the verge of actually quitting. Now, when I spoke to other people about this, and bearing in mind, first of all, that I'm a scientist, I'm British, and I'm male, so for me to talk about emotions, it takes quite a high threshold. When I spoke to people about it, they said, well, this is just something that everybody goes through, just keep going and it will be fine, And there was this kind of assumption that stress is just an integral part of the PhD. It's something you have to go through. Now, I think there is, maybe an element of truth in that. Part of the whole point of it is that you're doing something difficult. It's supposed to push you beyond what you could do before, and it's supposed to be something that most people can't do. It's kind of an elite thing. So, of course, there's going to be a lot of difficulty involved. But there's a big difference between, facing stress and getting through it and then, growing as a result of it, and stress that just builds and builds and builds and builds and builds to the point where it becomes overwhelming. So, So, if you face a problem and the stress level goes up and then you find a solution, then that's okay. Stress level drops again, right? And then you face the next problem, stress level goes up, and you get through, you find a solution, stress level drops again. This is fine, as long as you're returning to a kind of base level which is sustainable and healthy. But what we want to avoid is this kind of situation where it just builds and builds and builds and builds to the point where you can't even perform the most basic things. There is, I think everybody would agree, no doubt that very, very high levels of stress affect your ability to think. So if you imagine you've got a plane to catch in an hour's time, and you're running around your apartment and you're looking for your keys, and then you can't find them, and then you realize they're in your hand, right? Stress, even at that kind of simple level, it can make you stupid. So if you're constantly stressed in your PhD, how on earth are you going to perform these incredibly difficult things that are required? So this is the situation we want to avoid. Now, I'm going to present a few solutions, but I do want to be a little bit careful because of the language that we use in these kind of situations. So if we talk about stress or if we talk about anxiety, those are kind of everyday things that everybody goes through, but of course there's also clinical, psychological terms as well. so stress and depression and all of those things. And while the things I'm going to present, I think they can be applied in most situations, there are also things which, maybe you do need to go and see somebody who's a bit more specialized in, dealing with depression and those kinds of things. Okay, so it's by no means a complete solution. And if you are feeling this constant level of stress and it's affecting other areas of your life, that is a thing that you need to be open to doing as well. Okay, so how do people usually react when the work level gets too much? So often, if you feel like, well, I'm not achieving what I want to achieve, you'll look at these kind of things. So you try and have better time management, better organization and planning, using targets and to-do lists, setting yourself incentives so that you're kind of motivated, and also possibly some accountability, developing a positive attitude to the work, just being determined, or if none of these work, just work harder, just work longer hours. Now, obviously these things can work. There are many situations where they can. But is there anyone in this room who, is there anyone in this room who's unaware of these techniques? Okay, nobody. Right. Is there anyone in the room who's been able to consistently apply these techniques from day to day, and then they never experienced any stress and everything was fine? Okay. Does everybody's hands work? Yeah. Okay. So, obviously, these things are important, but they're not enough. So, there is no point in trying to kind of optimize for productivity if you're fundamentally approaching problems in the wrong way. So when you've got a process, when you know exactly what you need to do, fine, just make a to-do list, and go about it. But the kind of problems that you'll face in your PhD are not necessarily the kind of problems that these techniques will help with. So what I'm going to try and do is present an alternative way. So we want to go right back to basics and ask the question, well, what is a PhD fundamentally? What is it that we're trying to achieve? Would anybody like to volunteer an answer? Anybody? Silence. There's usually at least one. No? Okay. So it's a little bit worrying that in a room with maybe 40 PhD students, nobody has a confident answer to this. Why are you here? What are you trying to achieve? So that in itself is worrying. I've given this talk a few times, so I've had previous answers. So some people, one person said it's a driving license for research. Somebody else said it's a journey, a learning experience. One person in Sheffield said a PhD means that you're the world's leading expert in your research, which is kind of a high burden. I think if that's the criteria, I'll give mine back. Permanent head damage, a marathon, not a sprint, et cetera, et cetera. And what these things have in common, and they all contain some degree of truth, but they don't really tell you what you need to do. You can't take any of these definitions and then derive anything useful from that. So I'm just going to look at the last one here, the natural next step. And if you think of a PhD as that, and I think a lot of people go into PhDs just because, it does feel that way. If we think of it in terms of it being the natural next step, so you go through school, college, undergraduate degree, master's degree, and at each level, the best people move up to the next one, and then some people leave, and then next level, best people move up, some people leave. So what you end up with at PhD level is the very, very best, so the people who've done extremely well at all of these previous levels, and everyone else either leaves by choice or kind of gets filtered out. And so you can think of a PhD this way. It's been kind of the pinnacle of the education system, but there are some problems with that. If you compare the way the systems work, so at undergraduate level, or really anything before PhD, what you have is some kind of structured syllabus. So a set amount of information which is presented to you within a clear timetable so you know exactly what you have to do and when. Then you have standardized exams, so everybody does the same thing, and you know what is expected of you. Basically, if you show up and learn what you're supposed to learn, you'll do okay. And then you have a cumulative grade, so if you screw up one exam, you can make up for it in the next, as long as it averages out to something okay. And you also have local competition, so to be the best in the class, you just have to beat the other however many people are in your class. When you look at a PhD, it's not just these things, but more difficult. It's, in most respects, the exact opposite. So you don't have a structured syllabus. You decide what problem you want to work on and how you're going to approach it. You don't have a clear timetable. You might be told, okay, you have to finish this in 3 years or 4 years or whatever it is. But apart from that, there's no real timetable to follow. You don't have a standardized exam. You have an individual defense, which will be different depending on what you put into your thesis. You don't have a cumulative grade. So in that exam, it's all or nothing. So there's a huge amount of pressure. And also, it's suddenly global competition, because if you want to make a contribution to the body of knowledge, the bar is set relative to what has already been published. So you're suddenly competing with other academics all over the world. So what this means is that the skills which got you here are not the skills which are going to help you to succeed at PhD level. And so if you're accustomed to going through all of these different educational systems and doing well every single time, and let's be honest, most of the people in this room are smart enough to have got through that stuff without that much effort, then you suddenly get to PhD level and you find, for the first time in your life, I'm struggling, I'm failing, I'm not the best in the class anymore, why isn't this working? And so this can add to this feeling of intense stress as well. So I think it's important to kind of redefine what a PhD is, and instead of thinking of it as the top level of the education system, think of it as the bottom level of the professional academic system. So you're not the best of the best, you're a beginner, and it kind of takes the pressure off. You don't have to be awesome from day one, right? What your job is to kind of learn the skills to work in this system, okay? So here's my definition of what a PhD is. So a PhD is the entrance qualification to the world of professional academia. So whether or not you intend to carry on in academia after you graduate, this is kind of what the system is designed for. And the aim is to develop and demonstrate the skills of a professional academic researcher. So this starts to tell us a little bit about what is actually required in order to succeed. But what I'm going to focus on is skills in a very generic sense. So if we're talking about stress, there is a definite relationship between your level of skill and the stress that you experience in any given situation or when facing any given problem. Does anyone know who this guy is? Anyone recognize him? No? So this is Alex Honnold. He's basically the world's best free solo climber. He climbs without using any ropes or protection or anything. And so here he is, thousands and thousands of feet above the ground. And this is actually him taking a break. This is him in a quite relaxed situation. Now, for any of us, if you suddenly found yourself on that ledge, it would be beyond stressful, right? You would be freaking out. But because he's been doing this his entire life, because he's developed the skill to be able to cope with this situation, even though he will experience, the adrenaline and everything else, he has the skill to deal with it, right? So it's not the situation itself that is inherently stressful. It's the relationship between the difficulty of the situation and your capacity to cope with the challenges and cope with the demands of the situation. So to those people who say that a PhD is just an inherently stressful thing, I'll show them this picture and say, no, it's just about developing the right skills to cope with the situations that arise. So this is a model developed by a psychologist called Csikszentmihalyi, and it basically compares the challenge level or difficulty level of a situation or a task with your level of skill. So if the challenge level is extremely high, way higher than your level of skill, then you experience anxiety or overwhelm, right? Because you just don't know what to do. You've got this demand, you want to succeed, but you've got no idea how to do it. So all you can really do is panic. If, on the other hand, your skill level is extremely high and the challenge is low in comparison, if it's just easy, then you can feel relaxed. If it's kind of moderate challenge level, but you can kind of cope with it, then you're in control, and et cetera, et cetera. Now, it's not a perfect model. Obviously, things are a little bit more complicated than this, but it's a reasonable picture. The things which are kind of interesting are these two regions here, arousal and flow. So flow is when you have a very difficult situation which is right on the limit of what you're capable of doing, but if you're absolutely focused on the work, then you enter this state where nothing else exists, and you're just absolutely focused on the work, and time seems to sort of stand still. But then there's also this state here where the challenge is beyond what you can currently do, right? So you kind of feel a bit uncomfortable. You're not sure if you can succeed, but it's just out of reach, right? And this is where learning takes place. So it's not so difficult that it's currently impossible, but it's just almost achievable. And it's kind of this sort of state of tension where if you stay focused enough and you put enough work in, you can increase your level of skill and then, succeed and move forward. Okay? So a different way of representing the same thing. So if you want to increase your skill level over time, basically what you need to do is set the level of the challenge, design your own task so that the challenge is just beyond where your existing level of skill is, okay? And what will happen is the stress level will go up, right? Because you don't quite know what to do. You don't quite know what the solution is, but you try out a few things, you stay with the problem, and then you figure it out, and then suddenly, you've got that solution, right? Your skill level goes a little bit higher, and the stress level drops, right? And then you take on the next thing, which is a little bit harder again. You figure it out, skill level goes up, right? While you're doing that, stress level goes up, but then it goes down again once you've figured out the solution. So then we end up following this nice rhythmical pattern where the stress level goes up, but it comes back down instead of just building and building. Unfortunately, what so often happens is because we want to do the most impressive work that we can, because we want to impress our supervisors, we want to be ambitious, we set the level of the challenge like way, way, way up here, and then no matter how hard you try, you're just failing, right? And then your skill level doesn't increase over time, right? You just build up this stress again and again, right? So your chances of success are not necessarily proportional to the effort you put in, right? In this situation here, you can be working extremely hard, but never actually making progress because your skill level isn't increasing, simply because you're taking on too much at the same time. Okay. So when you're doing this, there's a few key principles that you need to follow. One is having uninterrupted time. So if you're operating at that point where it's just at the limit of what you can do, if you've got loads of distractions coming in at the same time, that's reducing your capacity to deal with the task, right? Because some of your attention's over here, some of it's over here, or if you're multitasking, there's no way that you can do those things which are kind of at the limit of what you can do. So it's impossible to improve your level of skill, okay? It also helps to have a clear focus, to know what problem it is that you're working on, so just one thing at a time. You need some kind of mechanism of feedback and adaptation. It also helps to be able to play with things as well. So sometimes, you find that you have a solution that kind of works to something, but then if you're under a lot of pressure, then you just stick with that one way of doing things. But sometimes playing around with ideas, playing around with ways of doing things, you can find something even better. And then also, of course, repetition, right? So when you're practicing something, just doing it again and again and again. Okay. So I'll give some examples of how this can be applied. So if you're doing experimental work, one example I always use is if you're doing interviews, because it's really easy to understand. So what a lot of people will do is spend a long time planning. Who am I going to interview? What's my sample going to be? What's my methodology going to be? And in some cases, I've come across people who spent 2 years planning, then they do one massive round of data collection, right, and then try and do one massive round of analysis, and then write it all up. But then what they're doing is setting that bar so high, right, before they've got the skill, and then they're trying to deal with this massive amount of data. If instead you see it as, well, I'm a beginner in this, I'm just going to try and do it on a really small scale, then what you do is say, well, I'll just try doing one interview. And if you do it that way, it doesn't even have to be something that you're going to use at the end of your thesis. But what you can do is interview one person, and you test the recording equipment, for example, right? And you come up with a few questions. And then you interview that one person and you realize, oh, they didn't really understand that question. Or, oh, the battery ran out on my sound recorder. Or if I record this in a noisy cafe, then I can't make out what the other person's saying. So then what you can do is go through the process of feedback and adaptation. So you assess how that went, and you make those small corrections. So the next time you do it, you make sure you've got a backup recorder in case the battery dies. Right? You run through you make sure that the questions are clear. You do all of these different things. So then when you do it on a larger scale, you've already got that base level of skill, right? And then you can interview some more people and more people and more people. And you can apply the same things to the analysis. So when you've got data from 2 people, how do you enter it into the software? How do you start doing that basic analysis? And then you can gradually scale up. So then when you go and interview 50 people, you've already been through all that process. You've got a higher level of skill. You're much less likely to make a mistake. And you've also got that confidence, oh, I've done this several times before. Right? So if you approach these things from a skill development point of view, the stress level is much lower. Right? Second example, if you're working with academic literature. So this is a universal thing everybody has to do. When you look at the stack of literature, you might have thousands and thousands and thousands of sources, and you think, how on earth am I going to process all of this stuff and turn it into a literature review? In my own PhD, one of the very first things that my supervisor asked me to do was to write a literature review. And so I decided that because I wanted to impress him, I was going to write the best literature review that the world had ever seen. Which I very quickly found out I was not skillful enough to do. And I never actually finished that literature review. I made a start, I read a lot of things, but I kind of felt like, I wasn't as good as I expected, right? And it's not that it completely destroyed my confidence, but it just took a chip off it a little bit. But what I should have done is start on a small scale. Instead of trying to summarize 1,000 papers or whatever, just start with 1. And you find that just summarizing 1 paper is quite difficult because they're not written to teach you, right? They're written for an expert audience, and when you're a first-year PhD student, you don't have that experience, right? But if you take just 1, you find it's a little bit difficult, the stress level goes up, but if you take some time to fully understand 1 paper, then you find, oh, suddenly this makes sense, stress level goes down, you move on to the next one. If you start with a paper that's in some way groundbreaking, that serves as the foundation for other things, if you understand that 1 paper, then it's a little bit easier to understand a lot of the work that followed on from it, right? So your skill level goes up, stress level in dealing with the following papers goes down, right? And then you just build up and build up and build up, and you get faster and faster and faster So by the end of your PhD, you can read something very quickly and assess whether or not it's good work. Okay. Final example in terms of writing, and this was touched upon earlier in the session on the thesis defense. What a lot of people do is try to write entire drafts of chapters or theses. But if you look at it instead on a smaller scale and just try and write small explanatory pieces, so you don't necessarily know how they'll fit together later on, but if you take, say, a little bit of the history of your field, how did this idea develop, right? And you just focus on that, and then you write and edit that to the best of your ability, okay? And then, you write another short piece and another short piece as you go and as you develop your knowledge. Then gradually, you can build up and get better and better. So then when you write your thesis, you've already got some of the pieces, but you've also been through that process of writing, editing, and refining your work as you go. Okay. So this is all very well, but what about when it all gets too much? So one of the fundamental universal aspects of research is no matter how simple an idea you start off with, it gets more complicated over time. So you might start off following this systematic approach of, well, I'll start this thing small and I'll build up my skill and everything else. But, you will eventually end up with loads and loads and loads of different things. So how do you cope with that when, if the stress level builds up to that point where, you just got too much? So in my own PhD, this happened kind of into my third year. So my first 2 years, I was working a lot, not really getting that much in the way of usable, publishable results or results that could go into my thesis. And meanwhile, everybody else in my research group that was publishing papers, one of them even finished a year early. So it's kind of feeling the pressure. And I was working in a lab, and one of the things I had to do was make these optical fiber probes. So taking an optical fiber, stripping off the plastic coating, which makes them flexible, and that leaves you with basically a strand of glass about the thickness of a human hair. So obviously incredibly fragile things, which also had these sharp tapered points as well and various coatings and all kinds of things. So it would take about 2 days to prepare a batch of these things. So I'd prepare maybe 30 at a time and hope that enough survived all the processing stages to actually be useful. And so I was in a lab at the very final stage of this processing and moving these probes from one bench to another, and I dropped them. So it wasn't the first time this kind of thing had happened, but for some reason, just that day, I just had enough. And I swore loudly and just stormed out of the lab. And it seemed like no matter what I did, every step forward that I took, I was taking 2 steps back. And so in this case, it would take me, I'd gone into the lab that morning, I'd put the work in, and it would have taken me another 2 days to get back to where I'd been that morning. So effectively, I'd have been more productive by not going into work that day and breaking those probes. And so I stormed out of the lab, and I was just walking across the campus, and I was thinking, I can't take this anymore, right? It seems like everything I do, it was kind of the reverse Midas touch. Everything I touch turns to, yeah. So I was kind of thinking, I can't take this anymore. I don't know what I'm going to do. So I just walked, and I was kind of thinking, well, I don't know if I can keep doing this, but what are the alternatives? I mean, if I quit, I'll have to find a job. I don't know what which I've been trying to avoid for a long time. I don't know what I'll do, but it's got to be better than this. It can't be as stressful as this. And so, well, okay, that's not going to be so bad. I'll find something. I'll have to tell my supervisor, but he'll understand. I have to tell my family, my friends, and if they've got a problem with it, I don't care. So I kind of thought, well, okay, if I quit, it's not that bad. It's not the worst thing that could happen, right? Like, it's not going to be as bad as just carrying on like this. So I sat down on a bench and decided to just think about this for a little while. And I thought, well, okay, if I'm going to quit, there's still one or two things that I could try. So what I'm going to do is I'll go back to the lab, I'll try these two things, and if they don't work, then I'll walk away. But if whether or not I stay is going to depend on these two experiments, I want to make sure that I've given it my absolute best shot. I don't want to do it sloppily, just as an excuse to leave. I want to leave knowing that I've at least given it one last good shot. So kind of collected myself, went back to the lab, slowed down, did everything as meticulously and as carefully as I possibly could, and the experiments worked. So I thought, shit, now I can't quit. But it taught me something. I've been so stressed out, I've been so used to these experiments failing that I've been kind of undermining myself by doing things a little bit too fast. And I realized that so many of my habits, so many of my reactions when things were going wrong were just leading to more things going wrong. So I developed or changed certain habits. So whenever something went wrong, what I used to do was find an excuse to check email. Because that's kind of justifiable. It might be an email from my supervisor or something. And then while the email was loading, of course, load news websites because, we should be informed citizens of the world. And then, of course, it's only 15 minutes to lunch, so I might as well, watch something on YouTube because there's no point starting anything else new now, right? So what was happening was every time I was facing a problem, I was basically anesthetizing myself from the problem, from the pain of the problem, by going online, right? So when I needed to be at my most engaged to solve a difficult problem, that was when I was at my most distracted. So what I did instead, really simple, I slowed right down and I took some time to think. And usually that meant just going for a walk around the campus for 10 minutes. And that habit alone helped me solve most of the problems that arose. Second thing was I did things as carefully as I could without worrying about the end result. And this is really key, right? So if you're constantly worrying about what are the examiners going to think? Is this going to be good enough? What is my supervisor going to think? What if I fail my PhD? What if I can't get a job afterwards? What if I end up, just homeless, living under a bridge, eating out of bins? If you start stressing like that, so everything you do kind of relates to this sort of big picture worry, you can't operate to your very best. So it's kind of accepting, well, experimental work, things will go wrong, but I'm just going to give it my best shot. I'm just going to do things as carefully as I can. I'm not going to let it affect my, kind of mental state. So then things started progressing. Started to get enough data for a couple of publications. Started to think, well, maybe, I've got enough for a PhD. And then got to the point where I had to stop doing experimental work and just write up what I had. And in that final period, when I was preparing to write, I made a really key decision, and that was to turn off the internet completely. So I was working on my thesis from home, and I got rid of my internet connection. I had physically no way of accessing the internet from home. And this was kind of pre-smartphone days, which shows my age a little bit. But basically what I had to do, if I wanted to check email, I had to go to a friend's house or cycle for 10 minutes into the university. And the first day, every time I got stuck, I was clicking on the browser. Even though I knew I had no internet connection, because it was this instinctive thing. It's this hardwired habit. When you don't know what to do, you just click on the browser, right? And just to test how many people have this similar issue, how many people checked email this morning before getting out of bed? So there's a ripple of honesty moving through the room. Okay, how many people have checked email during this talk? I should stop asking that. So, if it's the first thing you do when you wake up, right? And if you can't sit for 45 minutes, without checking email, if it's the first thing that you think of doing whenever there's this slight boredom or doubt about what to do, then every time you face a difficulty in your writing or in your research, it's going to be the first thing that you do, right? And so your brain, which is the most valuable resource that you have in terms of dealing with all of these problems, it's constantly going somewhere else, grabbing onto something else. And we give away our attention so cheaply, when was the last time you got an email that was actually really important? And how much time have you spent, looking at videos of cats, in comparison? It's massively disproportionate. And so this is one thing that people find incredibly difficult, giving up that addiction. But if you can, and it doesn't take that long, it just takes a couple of days, then it will make a massive difference to your ability to focus on the work, and also helps enormously as a result with stress. Obviously, it's not practical for everybody to get rid of their internet connection completely. I mean, it's sort of wired into everything now. So you can use various bits of software that block the internet for certain periods. So I use one called Freedom, where I set a timer for 3 hours, and then I can't access the internet for those 3 hours. But then you kind of get used to not being able to access it all the time. So even when I do have access, it's slightly less addictive, slightly less compelling. So it's really important to break that habit. Okay, so I'll just sum up with a couple of final things, and we'll get into the Q&A. So, key question is, how do you react when things go wrong? How do you react when you face a problem in your research, or when you feel that stress level building? Do you try to just be more productive? Try and work harder and faster and faster and faster, right? That's not going to work if you're doing something fundamentally the wrong way. In that case, it's better to slow down and actually look at the problem and take some time to think. Do you just switch to working on something else? So if, for example, you're writing and you face a block and you don't quite know how to phrase something, do you just switch to writing about something that comes a little bit more easily? That works in the short term, but then that problem, whatever it was, it remains unsolved. Again, it's better to slow down, address the problem, and then move on with a little bit of satisfaction that you've faced something difficult. And when you feel that stress building and building, do you just say, well, this is just part of the PhD and it's inevitable, or do you try and slow down, calm yourself down, so your brain can actually work on the problems that arise? And just one final thought. If we're talking about, kind of basically your mental state or your happiness, often, we get so fixated on, the PhD and the end result, and I've just got to keep pushing and get the PhD, get the PhD, get the PhD. But it's important to remember that getting a PhD won't make you happy if you aren't already. So we get so focused on this goal, right? This all-encompassing thing. But then even if you graduate and, everything's great for a couple of days and you feel fantastic, then what? So if you don't have, if you feel like you don't have enough in your life without the PhD, that's a far more important problem to work on. And so often people neglect the basic things, like human relationships and physical health and happiness, right? And that, if you find that you're so stressed in your PhD that you don't have time to have a meal with, your family or your partner, or you don't have time to, just take half an hour and go for a run. If you're so stressed that you feel like you can't do those things, slow down, pay attention to those things, and actually you'll be much better equipped to get the PhD. Okay. So, thank you very much, and any questions?
Any questions, anyone?
Thank you for this talk. That was very sort of helpful. I'm wondering, you're talking a lot about slowing down and relaxing. How do you actually do that when sort of the stress builds up? What kinds of things would you do?
Okay, I mean, first thing, I will repeat myself a lot when I'm talking about this. But the first thing is make sure that you're cut off from the internet, right? Because again, if that's the instant response, so you hit some kind of problem or you hit some kind of stress, and then you click on the browser, you check email, right? So what you have to do is create first of all, create the right kind of space where you can actually deal with that stress instead of distracting yourself with email or YouTube or Facebook or whatever else it is. Because those things, they're really, really good at masking the stress, but it doesn't get rid of it. So then you're kind of forced to face it. You know, you're forced with the computer screen, and you know, I don't know what to do. That usual option isn't there. And then, you know, there are some quite simple things that you can do. In my case, I just started taking short walks around the campus. So what I was able to do was, you know, take a step back, but my brain could still engage with whatever problem it was that had arisen. So I wasn't distracting myself with, you know, all that incoming information. I was just giving myself a little bit of time. And in terms of the problem-solving process, by taking that time and not feeling like I had to react immediately, I could think beyond the first or most obvious answer. So often what happens when we're stressed is we just keep trying the same thing. Whereas actually if you slow down and think, what if I try it this way, you know? And okay, if I don't do that, what about this thing? And so you can think of a couple of different options. And then you feel like, okay, if this doesn't work, I've got another option. So you kind of start to feel like you've got a little bit more control over the situation, potentially. And if that doesn't work, you know, if you can't even think about it, then go really back to basics and just try and physically relax yourself. So things like just sitting down somewhere and taking a few breaths, you know, so just taking 10 breaths and just focus on the breath. So it's kind of like meditation, you know, and just try and okay, just bring the heart rate down, you know, just physically relax that way. And stay there until you feel like your brain can start thinking about the problem again. And sometimes it takes a little bit of time, but that's so much better than just, you know, checking email and doing things that way.
Thank you very much for a very nice talk. I'm dean at this faculty, and these guys are my responsibility in a way. Not in a way. I'm responsible for giving them a good education. If you accept that you could probably give your talk also to the supervisors, if you could pick one advice to us as faculty or as responsible for this, what would you say to me when taking care of these beautiful people?
I think one thing that possibly supervisors sometimes forget is those students coming in, right? They're used to all of this success, and they want to impress you, right? And so sometimes they'll be setting themselves targets and things which are you know, beyond what they can currently do, and they'll come to you with all of this confidence. And then if they don't succeed, you know, if they have some problem, they won't necessarily tell you, right? And one thing I hear a lot from students is, I can't contact my supervisor until I've got the results. So they're not coming to you when they need the most support. So sometimes I think especially in the early stages, it's important to just, you know, say, okay, just do this little thing, you know. So in my case, with my supervisor asking me to write a literature review, it was way too big, right? And I stressed myself out enormously because my reference for a literature review was the one that he had written and published a year before, which is like this amazing all-encompassing thing. Whereas what he could have said was, okay, just write a short piece on this particular experimental technique. With figure out the theory, a little bit of the history, limitations of the technique. Just that. Right? He didn't know that I had in my head, I'm going to write the best literature review ever, but I did. So I think understanding that really common mindset that students have when they go in is that's probably the most important thing.
Okay, any further questions? Okay, I think James Hayton will hang around here during the barbecue afterwards, so please feel free to stop him and ask him questions. I think he'll verbalize what most of us have felt at some point during our PhD or later work. I think it's to the point there. And I hope that I will see many of you guys walking around campus in the coming year. So please stop me and say hi. And I'm just out on my walk, trying not to go online. And I'm trying to get my stuff together and my research going. But thank you so much, James. We have something for you. It's not a Hello Kitty spinner this time. It's a Norwegian flag spinner.
Thank you very much.
So thank you. And moreover...
Oh.
Norwegian chocolate.
Thank you very much.
And a cup from the University of Oslo.
Oh, wow. Thank you.
Thank you again. Thank you so much. So he has published a book. Could you? Yeah, I can have like this. And we have it in the library, so you can request it and read it. It's a nice read. And visit his blog as well. It's worth a few hours of procrastination and stuff. Anyway, I guess you're all quite excited now, especially those of you who have attended the poster session and had posters here today. But we're a little early in our program, so we take a 15-minute break, and we'll be back here announcing the winner of this year's poster contest at 3:15. So please don't go anywhere.